Good morning, everyone. Today, we're really excited to have Richard Clark and Shane Kelly joining us. They kindly jumped out and reached out to me last year, at the end of last year, to present on calf injuries in their cohort, which is with the Royal Ballet. And so I've been really excited to hear about their specific cohort and really what their unique insights are into calf injuries in ballet. We know that elite dance is quite a challenging, and it has a challenging and unique cohort of sport, and you've got male and female athletes performing to huge standards, or really high standards, particularly in the demands and on the calf as well. So we're really excited to hear about their thoughts and what they're doing with the Royal Ballet. Shane Kelly has been with the Royal Ballet for nearly 14 months now, and he moved into the clinical director's role at the end of last year. Previously, Shane was at British Athletics, where he worked for 10 years, 5 of those being the head physio. He has a specific interest in injury epidemiology and anything calf, foot and ankle. So he's really thrilled to be a part of the World Calf Project and everything that we can all learn together in this unique cohort. Richard is currently the clinical lead at the Royal Ballet, and he's been there for 4 years, having previously worked as the first team physio with Brentford Football Club in the English Championship. Richard's role currently focuses on implementing long-term rehab pathways and in-season monitoring programs with the Royal Ballet. He has a clinical interest as well in foot and ankle problems, and has started an internal project on posterior ankle impingement in ballet populations. So both have come from elite sport, and they're translating this into practice in the Royal Ballet. And so I'm really excited to hear and share their unique experience of their applications into ballet. So looking forward to hearing from you guys, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot, Evan. Thanks for the lovely introduction, and thank you, Seth and others, for the opportunity to be part of this World Calf Project, and also the opportunity to present today. It is a pleasure and it is an honour. Certainly, following on some of the presentations we've already had in this series, it's some big shoes to fill, but hopefully we can do it justice today in the next half hour. I'll start sharing my screen now. So yeah, can you guys see that?
Perfect.
Yeah. And presenter view. And we're off. So really, yeah, today for this next half hour, Richard and I are going to talk about calf injury in ballet. I'll start off with the first half and give a bit of an introduction into the Royal Ballet, Ballet Healthcare and the demands of ballet. And then Richard will sort of finish off the second half of the presentation today. But I've got to say, I am really pleased to be giving this presentation. I'm new to ballet, and I'm learning, and I think being involved in this calf project has pushed me to learn a bit more about calf injury and ballet a lot quicker, and I'm really pleased to sort of share what I've learned over the last few months in trying to get this presentation together for you today. As I said, I'm going to start with an introduction to Ballet Healthcare and who we are as a team and what we're trying to do. I'm going to talk about the physical demands of dance, obviously physical demands specifically of ballet, so we can understand what's being asked of the foot, ankle and calf. Then obviously move into calf injuries within our dancer cohort. Obviously, probably a really key aspect of today's presentation is trying to understand the injury itself. We'll look at then, therefore, our foot and ankle screening and profiling, and how we look to reduce the risk of calf injury, but also foot and ankle injury at the same time. Rich will talk about and present some of the data that we find and use within our daily practice at Royal Ballet. And then also lastly, then how do we sort of try and rehab sort of foot and ankle and calf issues when they do happen. So yeah, we do have to cover a lot in the next half an hour. Sadly, we can't get too deep into anything. It's a bit of a whistle-stop overview type presentation, but we have time for questions at the end. So yeah, look forward to those as well. As I said, I just wanted to introduce Ballet Healthcare. Multidisciplinary service provision probably hasn't been embedded within ballet companies for that long. Ballet Healthcare itself has been in existence, in its current form for probably about 7 or 8 years now. But there aren't that many ballet companies in the world, professional ballet companies that have a full medical team available to them, like we do at the Royal Ballet. So we are very lucky, but we're also very proud of sort of what we do and what we're able to offer the dancers. For those who don't know, the Royal Ballet is quite a large company. It has up to 100 dancers to look after. So if you consider that the company size is your squad size, we've got 100 dancers, but we also have a pretty decent sized team where we have about 15 practitioners, multidisciplinary practitioners, a team of 15 to look after those 100 dancers sort of year round. We do have some doctor cover throughout the week, but it's not huge. We only have sort of one day or one session of doctor cover a week. But then predominantly we have physio, coaching, Pilates, S&C available to the dancers most of the week. And then we have the option to refer in for psych, nutrition, or podiatry as well. But what we're most proud of is really that multidisciplinary element and being able to offer the dancers sort of year-round care. And certainly, I think they appreciate it, having a team embedded within the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden there. We have our own suite, we have our own facility with a small rehab gym and other pieces of kit as well. So, as I said, in terms of what we can offer the dancers is fairly unique in the ballet world. For those who aren't that familiar with the demands of ballet, it is a very physical pursuit. It is a physical art form. A colleague of mine once coined a ballet dancer a physical performance artist, and that's exactly what they are. They have to use their body to express an art form. But due to its physical nature, we've tried to look through it through a scientific lens, and over the past couple of decades, there've been multiple papers on trying to look at what are the physical demands of ballet. And so I've kind of just handpicked a couple of the best papers to really give an overview of what is demanded of the body and give you an idea specifically, maybe more what being demanded from the foot, ankle and calf today before we get into the sort of calf stats. If we look here at this first paper here by Wyon in 2011, Wyon and others describe ballet involving rapid and frequent changes of direction, periods of rest and high intensity, and high frequency of discrete skills such as jumping and lifting. And I think that is a pretty fair description of what's involved with a ballet performance or a ballet rehearsal on any given day. Exposure to dance durations equated to greater than 30 hours a week. So these dancers, when they come in, they can work up to, they are dancing and moving and within the studio up to 30 hours a week. So in terms of volume, that's a lot of volume to be on your feet in a studio, moving your body, dancing, using, your physical attributes. And therefore, and then on top of that, sometimes we ask them to do additional supplementary training for conditioning purposes, for performance purposes. So you can add sometimes between 1 to 7 hours a week of additional conditioning work. So, a dancer could be, by the nature of their job, training, moving, dancing, anywhere between say 30 to 37 hours a week, which is again, from a volume perspective, really high. If we compare it to other sports, I think ballet you could compare it to things like basketball or tennis, where you have periods of really high intensity work followed by periods of rest. And so you're sort of similar work to rest ratios to sports like tennis and basketball. So yeah, bottom line is it's a physically demanding, globally the challenges are quite high for a ballet dancer just as part of their job. If we look at a ballet season, I've taken this graph from one of our PhD researcher, Joseph Shaw, and a piece of work that he did. And this graph really shows the work of a dancer throughout a whole season. And if we look at the bottom, we have the start of the season, number 8, being August, going to the end of the next season being June. You've got roughly a 10-month period there where a dancer will be dancing, performing, and or training, much like, say, a footballer would, having a 10-month season. So their season's a long season. And as you can see, we've got males and females. So I think it's males at the bottom, females at the top, where the workload, this is just hours per week worked, fluctuates throughout the season. As we move through the months, there's a gradual increase in workload, sort of peaking or getting high around that October time, the start of the season, and then peaking again in January, and then dropping off slightly towards the end of the season. So that just gives, again, just an overview of volume of hours worked for these sorts of guys. It's a long season. They're sometimes long days, hitting numbers you can see sometimes up around 30, again, that sort of 30 hours a week of dance activity. I pulled up this picture. I was just cruising the internet as you do, trawling for pictures for this presentation, and I was trying to make a comparison again between sport and ballet and sort of the seasonal demands. And I thought football, because the seasons are similar, sort of starting in August and finishing in June. And then this picture popped up of Gareth Bale, and it was actually called Gareth Bale doing ballet. And I thought, well, I'll put it up there. But, if you could compare the ballet season being as long as a football season, the ballet dancers perform a few times a week, which, would be equivalent to your matches, a couple of matches a week. There are parts of the season which are more congested than others. That definitely happens in ballet and football. And then you've got your different ranks as well. And your different ranks certainly have different activity levels. And the ranks, you could consider different positions within a football team. So again, just trying to make some similarities to sport to sort of increase people's understanding. So what? We know that globally the demands of ballet are high. But then what about foot and ankle? Well, if we focus on foot and ankle and specific ballet movements and positions, just take a look at some of the photos here of some of the positions and movements within ballet that probably would have a high calf, foot and ankle demand. And if we look at the top left here, really, you can see the various different positions, from classical ballet, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth positions, where we have maximal sort of hip external rotation, maximal foot eversion, pronation of the feet. And these are the sort of the basis of a lot of classical ballet movements. So they have to plie and bounce and jump off that. So maximal positions in probably non-functional positions, you'd call it. Then you have, of course, on point, which everyone is familiar with, another common position in ballet. But look at the calf, foot and ankle demand of that. Again, you've got, again, extremes of range of motion, extremes of strength required to do that activity. To be able to walk across the stage backwards on point, is high calf, foot and ankle demand. And again, challenges that area massively. Then if we look at something like ballet jumps, we take it to a more really dynamic activity in ballet, where jumping is really, really common aspect of ballet performance and rehearsal. And you can see if both men and women jump, this jump's called a jeté jump. And you can see that the sort of heights achieved, the positions required to sort of get that height and then land from that and then continue to dance. Again, high foot, ankle, calf demand sorts of activities. So we're getting a sense of what's being asked of that particular body area. If we focus on ballet jumps, sometimes we've anecdotally seen ballet dancers, particularly the men, jump up to 500 jumps a day. And I know, working from other sports, particularly I've worked with volleyball before very briefly, the volleyballers would jump, say, 300 times a day. And we used to think that was a lot. And then I've come to ballet and now I'm seeing athletes or dancers jumping 500 times a day. That's a lot of jump load to achieve. And also the sort of intensity of jumps aren't small either. If we look at some of the literature out there from Imura or Blanco, that they say mean jump heights can be anywhere between 23 and 60 centimeters. So that they aren't small jumps necessarily either. They're big jumps. Some of the forces involved, we've got big ground reaction forces of 9 times body weight on landing. That's, say, from that jeté jump that we saw before. So we're talking about forces that are similar to other sports as well, but that involve jumping and landing. And almost not specifically, but a characteristic of ballet is that a lot of the positive work seems to be done by the ankle, and that's backed up by this Perry study, where they say that to create a jump within ballet, the calf, foot and ankle is almost, the demands are higher because of the positions and the demands of ballet jumping. If you look at ballet jumping, which Rich is going to show you in a minute, it is quite, ballet asks you to be quite upright, it asks you to be quite externally rotated, and because of the nature of the postures that you have to hold in ballet, a lot of the work creating a jump actually starts from the foot and ankle rather than, say, from the hips and glutes. Sort of taking that a little bit further, this is a real sort of snapshot of a dancer's jump week, and you can see on the axis here that this dancer in this particular week had jumped a lot. He'd had a high-ish day, then a more medium day, and then a high-ish day again, but then and then a quite a low day relatively, and then finished the sort of week with the highest day of over 450 jumps. And this is taken from an accelerometer that again was built and produced internally by Joseph Shaw, our PhD student. And we're able to get from this accelerometer sort of different variations of jump height throughout the week. So just again to show you that the sort of intensities of jumps that can be achieved or are achieved within a dance within a week. Again, trying to illustrate the demands of on the calf, foot and ankle. So finally we get to it. Well, what about calf injury, I hear you ask? Well, really, just I'm sorry to burst your bubble a little. There isn't that much from the literature on specifically on calf, soft tissue injury. If we try and scour peer-reviewed journals for calf muscle injury in ballet, there is very little out there on calf muscle injury. There is a lot on, there's individual papers and there's systematic reviews which talk about foot, ankle and lower leg injuries, but again, not specifically calf muscle. The only paper really that talks about specific calf muscle injury that I could find was from the Nick Allen paper from 2013, and they found specific calf muscle incidence to be 0.39 in males and 0.17 in females. So all we can get from that really is that male dancers had a higher incidence of calf injury compared to the females. If we take the table directly from that paper and we're looking at the incidence table for the male ballet dancers within that company, they looked at the injury rates for one season only in this particular paper. And what we saw is the number of injuries. They had 15 calf injuries that season. Again, the incidence 0.39. And you say, well, so what? The number's probably a bit arbitrary for most of us, like who cares? But in terms of other injuries, if we look up and down either the number of injuries or the incidence, calf injury had one of the highest incidences of any injury within that company. The only injury with higher incidence was, say, the knee joint or the thigh muscle here. The rest of it was less than 0.39. So, it's starting to give a bit of an idea of how frequent calf injury is within this particular company. But then if we add lower leg pain, Achilles tendinopathy, ankle instability, ankle impingement, ankle pain, foot muscle spasm and strain, that's one big functional area. You're talking about everything from the knee down being affected. And if you add all those numbers of injuries or all try and amalgamate the incidence for that whole body area, basically the lower leg, you've got an area of focus that's really important for a dance community. And as a sports science and medicine team, we have to be really, really comfortable with calf, foot, ankle function and be right over sort of our injury management and injury prevention processes for this area. So for this presentation, I dug into our own injury statistics, and I've sort of tried to present what we know of calf muscle injury specifically, because there wasn't much available in the literature. And what I looked back as far as 5 years, and what I found was this: 46 calf injury presentations over 5 years. That's around 9 calf presentations per season. So I would say over a 10-month period, having 9 calf presentations, almost 1 per month, it's a common thing. We certainly see enough of it every season. Over the 5 seasons, 23 calf injuries were time loss, that required at least 1 day away from either training or performance. Similar to the Nick Allen study, we found that the calf injury presentations were more frequent in the males than females. And similar to maybe some other epidemiology research in other cohorts, in other sports cohorts, we found that the average age of dancers getting calf strain was 32. So we're up again, we're seeing that thing of people getting calf injuries are slightly older. Interesting, of all the calf presentations, they seem to be even in terms of soleus versus gastroc. But it changes slightly if we look at focusing on time loss injury itself. So if we take those 23 time loss injury and just focus on those, over the 5 seasons, we saw that the mean return to dance was about 20 days, again, equivocal to other sports, in terms of return to sport after muscle injury. The soleus was slightly quicker than the gastroc in terms of return to dance. This is just absolute numbers in terms of soleus being more frequent. When it came to the time loss injuries, it sort of flipped things a bit, and it was clear that soleus was more frequent, probably significantly more frequent than the gastroc injury when it came to time loss issues. We had a decent number of say 16 initial injuries or index injuries, but we also had a fair chunk of recurrences as well. So we had 7 recurrences, which is around 30%, which is really quite a high recurrence rate of calf injuries, and something that I would want to look into further going forward as part of our injury prevention strategy. What's happening around those recurrences? Injury venue, we learned that class, which is basically the training that they do every day, was the most common area where they got injured versus say rehearsal or performance. And then finally, the mechanism of injury, what was the most common? Well, you can see that jumping here with 11 of those injuries were caused by jumping itself, but then landing, which would have been part of jumping, the dancer reported to cause an injury, and a jeté is a type of jump as well in itself. So if we combine jeté, landing, and jumping, we're starting to get an idea really here that jumping is one of the really key aspects of a causal mechanism or a contributing mechanism. So we need to know a bit more about jumping. So really from this analysis that I did for this presentation, I think we've got a lot better idea of who's getting injured, when they're getting injured, how they're getting injured, what structure's getting injured, how long they're taking to get back. And really it's up to us now to sort of take that information and sort of use that to inform our sort of injury prevention pyramid and change our practices going forward. I think I'll hand it over to Rich now. Rich, it's your part.
Cheers, Shane.
Are you going to share your screen?
Yeah, I've got that.
Yeah, all right. So we have to do a bit of a swap over here, guys. Apologies.
That looking okay?
Yeah, mate.
Do you want to mute? I'm getting quite a bit of feedback. Cool. Well, that's a pretty comprehensive start from Shane. So I thought I'd just start with a little video clip, really, just to break things up and, give you some nice insights into some of the higher energy demands that, that we see, what we're trying to build back up to. So fingers crossed it plays okay. No sound. Okay, can you hear it? So you've got lots of jumps on the spot from the male dancer, then some traveling around the stage. Really high energy, high forces, controlled landings, working with poise. Then we've got our ballerina coming onto the stage. And she's just going to absolutely nail some fouettes. 32 to be specific. It's an iconic moment in the Swan Lake Ballet. But really high energy. She'll have worked quite hard on this in the preparation for the ballet. And some more pirouettes on the spot, really working that form, high calf demands, high repetition, high energy again. And, you know, they've got to do all of this. This is in the second act of the ballet. So, you know, they've been on for 30, 40 minutes, intervals, costume changes, periods where they're at risk of, you know, getting cold. So a lot of attention to detail around core body temperature, muscle temperature. Great. So I think, you know, strength can be a bit of a nebulous term. You know, it gets used in you know, in passing, and, you know, we're not always as specific as we should be. And I think it's something that we try really hard in our MDT to be really specific about what it is we're trying to improve, particularly when it is, you know, an aspect of strength. But what is it we're really trying to improve? And I think, you know, you'll all agree that we saw different aspects of foot, ankle, and calf strength in that challenging video that I just shared with you now. It's been mentioned before that, you know, soleus plays a huge contribution in the vertical and horizontal propulsive forces for you know, sprinting, jumping, landing, and its balletic technique really involves a lot of propulsion and deceleration, you know, from or onto a bent knee. And so, you know, in our mind, it's really a key muscle that needs to develop and transmit, you know, high levels of force to develop an effective, you know, ballet technique, effective ballet performance. And, you know, here you got one of our dancers in, you know, in full costume, getting his calves, you know, fired up before he heads onto stage. And, you know, the high cost of, you know, lower leg injuries in our population, you know, trying to understand our normative data and profiling this area really helps to inform our strategies and our rehabilitation guidelines. So we've probably been taking calf strength data through rehabilitation for about 3 or 4 seasons, using our force plate, but we've been able to add it into profiling over the last couple of seasons. And yeah, it showed some interesting numbers across the cohort. You know, I think, like we've heard from other people, you know, really our benchmark is roughly around 2 times body weight. And, you know, if we look at the results there for males and females, we see that they're probably slightly under that. But I think, you know, notwithstanding, it's at the end of a 4 or 5 week break off. It's the first couple of days back into a new season. It's not a comfortable test, which is something we're working on in-house to try and improve. So hopefully some of the numbers are slightly higher than that, and, you know, we do see numbers higher than that, as you can see on our leaderboard there. You know, there are certainly a handful that peak over 2 times body weight, and if someone does enter a rehabilitation path, I'd say generally that's the goal, because we know roughly where they've been. We know it's such an important, you know, baseline marker that really we'll try and get them north of 2 and towards 2.5 if we can. Single leg calf capacity, as you might expect, you know, we see a lot of endurance, and whether that's metabolic, whether that's strength endurance, but, you know, we expect to see high numbers in our cohort. And, you know, in the last couple of seasons, we've capped the test at 35, because in previous seasons there hasn't been a cap, and you sort of see, you know, polarized aspects of that. You know, without a target, some dancers are more likely to kind of stop early, thinking, you know, 20 or so is enough. You know, that's got to be enough, surely. And on the other hand, we've got others that go on and on and on, and we see 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, and then we have a different conversation around calf soreness, and, you know, we want to have a positive outcome from the profiling. And, you know, when we set a target of 35, you know, we get close to that, with the females performing slightly better than the males, which perhaps you might expect given the high demands of point work that that's required. And so into our rehab process, we set high standards for, calf endurance, calf capacity. A large proportion of our injuries, have the mechanism jumping, or an aspect of jumping, as Shane, alluded to. And so the sports scientists really help us to understand how the dancers are jumping. And actually we do a lot of video recording as well of the quality of the jump, and try to look at the quality of the jump as much as the sort of raw numbers. And peak landing forces give us an initial idea of the quality of their landings, but we try and make that a little bit more relative and specific, and standardize that for body weight. Loading rate tells us the rate at which the force is developed upon landing, and the sports scientists just try to again use some objective information as to the quality of the landing, and the recycling of energy back into repeated jumping. We see a range of body weight forces upon landing from 1.39 up to 4.99 times body weight. And I suppose we don't have any kind of a particular marker that we're necessarily looking for, but we're looking for some aspects of symmetry. We're looking against previous profiling data, and I'll come into a little bit later, but also looking at what their previous injury history is, and we sort of take a casting vote as to whether we think from the subjective aspects to the objective aspects, is the way that they're working actually efficient for what they do. And the Royal's quite a unique company in that you become an employee of the Opera House once you join us, so as a ballet dancer. And we tour once a year, but all of our performances are in the same building, so at the Opera House in Covent Garden. So it's not unusual to have a dancer who joins at 18 and is still with you into their mid-30s. So it's a great place for longitudinal data, and I think we want to work on improving our in-season data collection, but we do get at the very least regular points of profiling data, whether that's through medical attention events or through injury or through profiling, and we're able to, over time, we start building up nice pictures. And I always think that's more valuable, looking at things over a longer period of time where it's possible. So what do we do to try and mitigate some of our injuries? I suppose an important nod here to Sume's, who's well revered in sports medicine, sports physiotherapy generally, but really is a ballet specialist from her time at Oz Ballet, and she shared with us the ballet Carthrice protocol that she implemented into Oz Ballet some years ago to try and improve their foot and ankle and calf injury data, and they've seen that with good effect. And and it's really kind of, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but actually to implement a sports medicine injury prevention strategy into the fabric of ballet class is quite a big thing. So the dancers are asked to do 16 single leg rises on each leg, and going back to that first slide around what is it we're developing. I probably don't know whether it's really developing strength in terms of the repetitions or the overload that they get. They're asked to do it every day, but it's really a focus on technique. There's a real kind of focus on being present in the exercise, and ballet dancers are really, really good at taking the path of least resistance. And I think if maybe there's one thing I've changed in moving over from something like football into ballet, is how important that how you do something, how you do the exercise, because we might look at calf rises, but the range of movement is staggeringly different, and having strength through range is super important. And yes, it's a calf exercise, but actually trying to feel connected to the whole posterior chain, the hamstrings, the glutes, and not be on top of the ankle, but actually be lifting up from the ankle is an important aspect to the exercise. And I think, potentially that's something that, we could share from our cohort into other sports. I think as well, there's probably some prerequisites for being able to do bodyweight calf rise as well, and that's it's a starting point. It's an easy point if you've got no other options. But I really think trying to get some external load onto the calf's really important to actually then drive both the technical but also the number of calf rises that you can do. It'd probably be remiss of me not to mention the foot. It's something quite ingrained actually in ballet culture, having a strong foot for technical ability, and it's definitely something that gets covered in a lot of the rehabs and worked on particularly well by Jane Paris, one of our Pilates instructors, who's spent a long time working on rehabilitation in ballet. And there's been a little bit more awareness around the foot now. I think we need to be able to measure that a little bit more and really look at its contribution, and is it neuromuscular activation? Is it actually strength? But we definitely see a link with the dancers' jump quality and feeling like they've got a solid spring to push off from, but also control their forefoot landings. So yeah, I think it's an area to look into more into the research world and certainly in house. But yeah, as I say, it'd be remiss of me not to mention it. And I was trying to sort of prepare a rehab ladder and try and kind of get across how we might approach our calf injuries, but also generally our foot and ankle injuries. And it sort of became clear that, as you might expect, that it's just really not a linear process at all. Objective markers are, completely central to that process, and it becomes this kind of, web of content that we amalgamate together. I think when we look at planning, diagnosis is really important, and that being really clear is helpful for both the dancer and us for goal setting and rehab planning. And we sit down with the dancer and with the whole MDT that are involved in that rehab and try to have some agreed goals about how to move forwards. And as part of that, we'll balance out previous injury history, because we're assuming that there is going to be a link between their other past medical histories. So whether that's some kind of tendinopathy, FHL, Achilles, or whether it's previous calf injury, all of those really might affect how quickly you might progress one's activity. And I think we're becoming better at being proactive with nutritional and psychological strategies early, rather than realizing it's a stumbling block 3/4 of the way through the rehab. And we're still working hard with the dancers in terms of education on nutrition, particularly because of the long days that they endure, and having a sense of that's really important. The coaching pathway again. So we're really lucky to have Brian, who's our ballet rehab specialist, who actually takes ballet class as well. So we have a really nice smooth transition, and we have a kind of overlapping S&C program where we try and address those different aspects of strength. Some of them, at the same time, because the reality is you probably haven't got 3 to 6 months to do, a really strict periodized calf loading plan, and actually you've got to try and target those different areas of muscle architecture development and metabolism at the same time. And our return to jump pathway is really concrete. There's no way you can easily accelerate 500 jumps a day, and so we try to bring in, as early as possible, we try to bring in some of that on the reformer, where we can offload, but work on the technical aspect of it still. and then feed into bodyweight variations of that, whether that be in the gym or focusing on balletic jumps in ballet coaching. Shane's already mentioned Joe, our PhD researcher, and we're trying to learn a lot more about balletic load, because as we see in other sports, it's the end goal, and we need to know what we need to get our dancers, back to, and how we do that. And Joe's been helpful in trying to set up some dashboards that help us better understand the high energy metrics. We think jumps, is like, I don't know, high speed running, for football. That's probably the primary thing that we need to know about and how we progress it. And we can then further look at our progressions at our higher level energy progressions, and look at our more maximal type jumps and get nice, steady progressions of load back up to our 500 jumps a day. So, where do we need to go? I think we're going to continue to scrutinise our injury epidemiology and try to better understand our high energy loads in ballet, so namely jumps and workload. We want to better understand the relationships between the different injuries in the lower leg, because there's certainly a concentration of different injuries down there. As I mentioned, we want to better understand our in-season variation of performance metrics. Joe's other arm of his PhD is looking, at neuromuscular fatigue, and it stands to reason that, with 30 plus hours a week, how your energy levels and fatigue and fitness and freshness varies through a week might impact your injury onset. I think we want to definitely develop our prevention pyramid for the calf, foot and ankle. We've got calf rises in class, and most dancers know that in their S&C program that, working with some external loads important, but doing that maybe in a more standardized way is something that we want to look at. And to better understand the measures of foot strength, really. And that's twinned into our in-house research and PhD. So we've got PhDs going on that are looking at injury epidemiology, posterior ankle impingement studies, and workload quantification, and the kinetics and kinematics of ballet jumping. And hopefully in the next few years, we're going to be able to share a lot more interesting and data and understanding around the physical demands of ballet and have a more objective approach to this art form. So in summary, calf injuries, are common in ballet. They seem to happen more in males that are older than 30 years old, and that's probably our target group that we need to probably sit down and talk about. The calf, ankle, foot complex is an extremely important zone for ballet, both in terms of injury location, but also in terms of performance. The primary injury mechanism is jumping, and ankle plantar flexor strength and capacity is pivotal for muscle performance and our rehabilitation strategies. And understandably, there's probably still a little bit more to understand. And that's it.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you, guys. That was an awesome presentation and a lot of information to digest. Questions from the cohort? Anyone want any comments or questions? I'm opening the door. Seth, I know you'll have something.
Honestly, no, I haven't. I'm going to be quiet and let everybody else go. Cheers.
Nothing too hard.
Tanya, any comments from your end?
Nothing, except there was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for that. It was awesome.
No worries, Tanya. Pleasure.
I think
as you guys
from my perspective
highlighted that. Sorry, Evan. The 500 jumps a day is obscene, isn't it? Really, when we think about it from a jumping sport and jumping perspective, and maybe a bit more ankle dynamics and foot dynamic, really jumping wise, than actually a lot of the volleyball and basketball, where it's much more knee driven, maybe as well. So it's really interesting to see that actual data come through.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't think they don't do that every single day, day after day. And you probably saw from the graph, there's lots of variation. But yeah, just to give you an idea of some of the bigger days that they can have. So that, I suppose, that gives the challenge of how do you prepare them for those extreme days or those extreme weeks. Yeah.
Evan, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
See, yeah. So Alex is asking, did the type of jump make a difference in terms of injury, i.e. petite, allegro, rotational, end of the sequence?
Rich, did you want to have a go answering that?
I don't think our injury surveillance probably tells us that enough. It's largely, it's quite broad. It's jumping, landing, and it doesn't necessarily tell us. Probably if we went through manually, I think we'd probably find that. But I would say it's more the high energy jumps that I would anecdotally off the cuff probably that we see more of the injuries from.
Certainly, Adam's PhD, our S&C coach Adam is looking at balletic jumps and the different types of balletic jumps, and then the requirements of the foot and ankle from a biomechanical perspective. So I think that might give us a bit more answer in terms of what might be the high demand jumps, and therefore create more risk of injury.
I think as well, it's really. It's particularly. Everything's multifactorial, isn't it? But it's particularly multifactorial in this cohort, and it's almost like if there's a particular element that's just not quite right, it doesn't have to be the big jump. It could be the petit allegro, but it really depends. It's really hard to nail down what the factor is that's pushed it over.
And so, sorry, I do have a question now. If you looked at the and those mechanisms, I know you kind of have the jumping and landing and things like that. Have you had a chance to look at, say, where the location of the injury, soleus, aponeurosis, that kind of stuff, in terms of any MRI characteristics and the type of mechanism? Have you had a chance to look at any of that stuff?
Sadly, no. I think I did look at it in terms of did they have a scan or not, and there was actually a lot that didn't have any radiology at all. There was a real mixed bag of no scan, just clinical diagnosis only. There was ultrasound, there was MRI. I think going forward, just from doing this exercise, I would like to be a bit more frequent with our radiology within reason, but I'm not saying we're definitely going to MRI every person that comes in with a calf complaint. As you can see, there were lots that weren't time lost and they were able to just continue. So I think we just need to look at that radiology question, and I think it's an opportunity for us to look at that a bit more detail in the future for sure, Tony. But from this data set from the past 5 years, there was a real mixed bag in terms of whether they were scanned or not. Yeah.
I think as well, we had a little look at some of the MRI reports, and the ones that we did scan over the last few years. And, I think generally speaking, we probably would have escalated that to MRI if we were suspicious of a higher grade injury, basically, and that might have affected, the return to dance pathway. And I think, probably we were surprised at the number of, grade, they weren't, high grade 2s, 3s, 3Cs injuries. Actually, a number of them, even though they seemed quite disabling and quite a lot of discomfort, ended up being grade 1. So there wasn't always that clinical
correlation.
That clinical correlation actually, which was interesting.
And because the ones that have no time loss, when you think about if they're doing 500 jumps on a given day, like how do you explain that? Like what is that a calf injury if they can kind of then go and do that and not have any time loss from those kind of activities?
Yeah, I think there's probably elements of the rehearsal, there's elements of class that they can do. It's maybe not quite as clear cut as, frankly, if you can't run, you can't play football, but
Yeah.
there are probably elements of a low-grade calf injury that you can still try and work with. And also there's a lot of incentive as well, because, if you're, again, you can't kind of drop in into a performance. If you miss the rehearsal block, you miss the shows. So if you get injured during the rehearsal block, and it becomes a time loss injury, there's a lot of incentive to try and work with it, and that's a factor, we frankly have to battle with quite a lot, because not only do you then miss the stuff that you've been working on, but probably your rehab takes you out of the next ballet as well, because you're going to be in a rehab path, and all of a sudden that mounts up. But if you miss the rehearsals, you miss the stage calls, you can't go on stage.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a lot of that going on. Looking at some of those smaller grade injuries, there's a lot of modified activity, allowing them to continue to be involved in some aspects of their rehearsal or class. But
yeah. So then that's not recorded necessarily as time loss if they're kind of still doing something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll jump in.
Lots of other questions coming up, so I'll shut up.
Russell is asking how you benchmark straight knee gastroc position for your strength testing. So I guess a standing isometric strength test.
Yeah, well, we do that with the force plate in the ISO rig, and we don't profile it, more so out of time and practicality of the profiling sessions that we've got, but we'll probably look at it in a rehabilitation path a bit more. Adam's been looking at it in his PhD, and found good intra-rater reliability and good correlation between the gastroc scores and the Solaire scores.
Okay. Any numbers? Are you?
I've
seen 1 point. I've seen equal. Seth talks about 2 times body weight anyway, and then I've seen 1.3 to 1.4. So
in terms of gastroc, it's 2.5 times body weight as a bit of a benchmark, and then again, if you're on a rehab path, you might try and take that up to 3.
Yeah.
We're trying to raise the bar.
Danny, he's asking about recovery strategies in between performance and what you guys are doing calf specifically.
So there's a multitude of recovery strategies. It's there's been a lot of investment in self-management for the dancers. 90 dancers is a lot to oversee, and the schedule doesn't. The schedule doesn't really allow for group-based recovery sessions because of the rehearsal schedule. Because you might have, Shane mentioned about some are in week performances, but you might have 2 performances in a day. Never mind 2 performances in a week. So it's you can imagine what they are. We've got recovery pumps that the dancers come and use when they can in between rehearsals for calf recovery. They quite like some cryotherapy. I'm quite prone to getting into some cold water buckets, and nutritionally, there's been an emphasis on cherry tart and the timing of that post-show nutrition as well. So trying to ensure they get in some protein shakes and nutrition in and around show time, and not sort of be depleted either for the show but also following it.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny. Colin's asking if there's any correlation between isometric force, I guess the Solaire seated test with calf capacity. I don't know if you've had the chance to graph that, and if the guy's getting the 86 in the endurance test, also 3 times body weight, I guess.
You know what, Shane, Adam actually was looking at that. I don't think he's found a correlation. So because he was looking at whether we should consider just picking one for profiling, and I don't think he's seen enough correlation to say that you should do one over the other. Therefore, we'll probably carry on doing both.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to sort of formally do that. I don't know how quick or seriously he did that, but you know, if he, it's a great question from Colin, and it's one that I would probably like to formally say, you know, to get an answer to. We definitely have the data there to do it. I think, yeah, it's a great question to sort of answer. You know, is our testing, what is our testing telling us?
Yeah, maybe I can just add to that a little bit in terms of that relationship, particularly if you're trying to look at the correlation with the number of calf raises. The number might not just be specific enough to actually provide you that information, and you need to extend and look at the work metrics that would actually consider the body weight of individuals and how much they actually displaced. So that's what I'm finding in profiling rugby athletes in New Zealand, is that the number doesn't actually, and Silbermager work from the US also substantiate that the work metric is more sensitive. Right. So you might actually be missing out a little bit on just using the number of calf raises.
Great. Thanks, Kim.
So Alex has a couple more questions. Any correlation between calf injuries and dancers with hypermobility scores, if you're looking at hypermobility scores?
We used to, didn't we, Rich? And I think I haven't done it in weeks.
Just kind of, I knew you'd ask something like that. I think, you know, we kind of accept that they all display characteristics of hypermobility, and therefore I think we just try and focus a little less on it, to be honest. I don't think we really obsess about hypermobility and what, you know, Baton score they get, and because they all exhibit traits of it. So so yeah, we're much more focused on what they can do strength wise.
Yeah, I don't think we've gone as far as looking at correlations of hypermobility and yeah, calf injury. We're not really going down that avenue. No.
Perfect. I think we've clocked over to 1 hour, so we'll let everyone live their days, and enough for today. But that was a really great presentation, so thanks, Shane.
Before we finish, I just thought we missed an acknowledgement slide at the end, and I do want to acknowledge Adam, our S&C, who's doing a PhD on jump mechanics. So and thanks to him for some of his info for today's presentation. Thanks to Joseph Shaw, who's another PhD internally, who's gave us a lot of jump workload injury information too. I want to plug some of the pictures that I used today as well. It's in there in the presentation. When you share the slides, people will see the credits to the pictures that were taken and used. So yeah, I just thought I had to get that in before the end as well. So thank you to the Ballet Healthcare team as well.
And thank you to you too. So tune in. We've actually got an in-house calf month in Aspetar next month. So I'm just working on trying to get access to those videos. We'll have some cool presenters, so I'll keep you posted on that one. Four new presentations coming soon, hopefully.
Wow. Great.
All right.
Thanks everyone. Thank you for today.
Thanks everyone.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done.